Thanks very much. Look, it's the end of the day, so I'm not going to hold you up too much. I'm only going to give you one slide rather than 100 slides. But it's fundamental to coming back to that whole question with new technologies. Everybody wants to know, will the public buy it? Because there are some great technologies, some ones game-changing. If we go back 15 years ago when GM first started appearing, other new technologies, the big question is, but will the public buy it? Well, over the past 15 years, we've been doing a lot of studies on what drives the public's thinking about foods in general and about different new technologies in general and how they apply to different food types. And we reckon we're getting pretty close to it. And I often tell people, I take a bet and I say, if I sit down with someone and have a conversation with them, within 10 minutes, I can tell them with that person what their attitudes towards GM food are, without ever mentioning GM food. And things I want to know about, what are their risk-benefit understandings, what are their trust in government, what's their values, are they pro-science, are they pro-environment, are they pro the rest of it? And based on that, I can pretty well figure out and find out what they would have as a food type. Because we do know several things, that people's attitudes to GM foods are not about GM. They're about your general attitudes to science and technology in the world, your attitudes to trust, your attitudes to risks and the benefits. So having the perfect food type, if you get it in the field and it works great for the farmer, if it doesn't work for the consumer, you're in trouble. So I'm going to show you this graph here, and it's a study we've been doing to sum up some things. We've been doing these studies since 1999, and this one is looking at different food types. If you can't read them, I'll run them down very quickly. Organic food, food containing preservatives, processed foods such as cakes or biscuits contain only a small amount of GM ingredients, processed foods such as bread or soy milk that has been made from GM crops, genetically modified fruit and vegetables, big one for AUSVEG of course, meat and other products from animals that have been fed with GM stock feed, food grown with the use of pesticide, meat and other products from GM animals, and meat and other products from the offspring of cloned animals, and finally, meat and other products from cloned animals. Now, rather than ask this on the way most media do, would you or would you not eat GM food? Yes, no, don't know. We ask this across a 10-fold scale, on a scale of 1 to 10, because people aren't just for or against. They're a little bit for, a little bit against, maybe certain. So we ask on a 10-fold scale. 0, completely against, 10, completely for. And we find we get a bump at each end, extremely for, extremely against. It drops down, and the bulk of the population are in the middle. But these people, we call the polar bears because they're the polar opposites, they run the public debate. They write letters to newspapers. They're the ones who get on radio and TV. And they're often perceived to be the general public, when we know in fact they're not. So what we've done here, broken that 10-fold scale into 3 groups of thirds equal. And you can see, so the aqua colour on the end, that's huge support. And when you get down to the dark blue, a larger group is against. So organic foods, you see, have the biggest support. And down the bottom, meat and other cloned products for animals has the lowest support. Now, another study we do is looking at different types of food types. So we've done this in supermarkets, we've done it in focus groups. We'll stand outside, and I did this on TV on Catalyst. Some of you might have seen me doing this on Catalyst on the ABC. We'll have a papaya in one hand and a plate of lamingtons in the other. And we'll say when people come out the supermarket, I've got a GM papaya, or I might say it's a non-GM papaya. And I've got lamingtons, they might be non-GM, they might be GM. So we'll move it around and watch what happens. But in general, people don't want to eat the papaya if it's GM, but they don't care if the lamingtons are GM. And you say, well, hang on, that's a bit, contradictory, isn't it? Why is that? And the reasons that come back are really bizarre. And the first one is, papaya is a natural food, so you don't want to do anything to nature. But lamingtons, they're not good for you anyway. Well, there's only a little bit of GM in them, surely, or et cetera, et cetera. So we also know there's a scale we call the scale of tinkerability, which means you put GM into junk food, most people don't care. You put it into whole foods, people are more concerned about it, or they want to have a more detailed debate about it. In that case, you have to then have a health benefit. So if you're moving up the scale of tinkerability, you're putting GM into tomatoes, into carrots, into whatever, people say, but where's the health benefit? Primarily, then cost and the others down the line. Now, if you hit the second button on the second button, please, jump forward. Okay, this is the key thing from this one. We know that when people go and give you an opinion about what they will like to a food type, they lie. They don't lie on purpose, but they don't tell the truth. So a lot of studies have looked at, they've surveyed people going into supermarkets and said, tell me about your shopping habits. How many vegetables do you buy? How green do you shop? How healthy do you shop? Okay, thanks. Then they wait till they come out of the supermarket and say, hi, remember me? Let's have a look in your trolley. And of course, oh, look at all those chips and Coke and things. You didn't say wrong. Oh, look at that. Look at that. So people do have a disconnect between what they think they do and what they do. So when it comes to GM foods, how do we know what people would actually do if everything's theoretical? If all we're asking is, what do you think you might do? GM food not. What we can do is we can benchmark that against behaviours we do know about. And the two I've highlighted here are foods with preservatives and foods containing pesticides. We do know what people say about how they like to buy them, and we do know how people do actually shop against them. The real interesting thing is that GM foods sit largely between those two in terms of attitude, and therefore we're going to presume roughly between those two in buying behaviour, which you can't test until they're on the shelves. GM fruit and vegetables is very close to middle range, 38, 33, 29. More people are concerned about pesticides in food than are concerned about most GM in food. That's the bottom line we find from the public talking over and over. Even if this is what they tell us, not what they actually do, if the behaviours are different, what they tell us, they're more worried about pesticides and preservatives rate at the other end between them, how they sit between them. So I'm going to give you 4 takeaway messages to remember about what we know about this, then pass back some broad questioning. A small amount of people have a big concern about GM food, and a big amount of people have a very small concern about GM food. More people in Australia feel the benefits outweigh the risks than feel the risks outweigh the benefits. Concerns about GM foods are similar, or framed between concerns about pesticides and preservatives in food. So relativity, important to understand. And our attitudes to GM foods in crops are driven largely by our values to science and the world around us, which frame not just our attitudes to GM foods, but our attitudes to foods in total. And with that, I'm going to allow for any questions of me or the panel to continue, certainly.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Look, we'll just have this open discussion now, so feel free, any question. Look, I don't think anything's frivolous. I mean, if you want to know something and get an answer, we've got the people here that can probably tell you. So we'll start up there. If you just give your name and where you're from.
Tim Haslett from Stanthorpe. Craig, is that graph different to what it looked like 5 years ago, and is it different to what it looked like in 5 years' time?
It has moved. It has moved significantly. A couple of key things have stood out in the 5 years, if you've seen some of the data I've been doing over the last decade. And the biggest movements have been towards, one, the public no longer will say, if I ask them a question about GM food, they'll say, oh, but what type of gene modification? Was it from the same plant? Was it from a related plant? Was it from a different plant? And so the closer the species, or within the plant, very happy with it. Similar species, not too bad. Animals, not really comfortable with that. Bacteria, less comfortable with that. Humans, don't even think about it. So that's one thing that's become very consistent. This graph's moved around a little bit since then, but the attitudes have also solidified more. So when we looked at that tenfold scale, people are now betting those down. So we're reaching a point, we're seeing more certainty rather than flux in public attitudes.
Craig, I've got one. Is how's the American? I perceive that they were 40% against, 60% for. Would that be correct, or is that actually swinging more for these days?
If you break it into those for and against categories, and we discover that's a simplification that doesn't do justice to the way people think about it, because it works in a political system, because are you going to vote someone in and vote someone out, but because people do have these long stretches of, well, a little bit for, a little bit against, a little bit against, a little bit for, you need to understand whether you have a propensity of people who are who are extremely anti, or just a little bit anti, because then you know where you're going to get movement. And that's very important, knowing you're going to get movement. But in general, the American trends have been a bit up in the air a bit because of the global financial crisis. And when you have and I can show you a graph we have that we've tracked stats from 1999, and we know that public attitudes to GM food, for instance, are closely aligned to global paradigm changes. So in 1999, when we started, the big paradigm was anti-globalisation, anti-multinationalisation. So at that stage, if you were aligned with a multinational, it was bad. We then moved into September 11, Bali bombings, Madrid bombings, moved into an era of mistrust, an era of lack of safety. So anything that was seen to be risky was bad. And you played it risky, continued dropping down. 2006-07, huge change, and suddenly support for GM foods went up through the roof. And that was because we'd entered an era of global citizenship. At that stage, everybody was doing everything they could for the planet. They were all changing our globes and changing our shower heads and doing everything. And at that point, even people who had died in the wool organic food eaters said to us, well, you know, this GM thing, if it's good for the planet, we should consider it. In 2009, we hit another global financial crisis. Attitudes changed again. We moved into a thing they call the three Fs, friends, family and finances. People start pulling things back again, being very more conservative in their attitudes. So these things do have big impacts on new technologies.
Yeah, that's good. Have one down here.
John Sade from Victoria. Craig, do people really know what is a genetically modified vegetable?
No.
Good answer.
The important thing is the knowledge doesn't really make that big a difference, because people aren't shopping based on knowledge, they're shopping based on emotion. And for the scientists to start saying, but you just don't understand the science, I say to the scientists, yes, but you don't understand the people's emotions. And if you understand the emotive drivers, you can align with them as well.
I'll go up the end of the room out there, please.
Hi Craig, it's David Element here from WA. Just going back to the pesticides bit there, is the work you've done, did you have a look at separating pesticides with herbicides and fungicides and understanding if anybody had any differences in, consumers had any differences in perceptions of those, or it's just considered pesticides as one?
The majority of the public don't see any differences in those. It's putting chemicals on food. And we all know chemicals are bad because they're called chemicals. You know, it's very simple, very simplified.
I've got one down here, Danny.
Yeah, I've actually got one for you, Jeff. You know that dream that you had just now about how you're doing the whole thing? You left out barcoding the product and branding the product with the
Bacteria.
With the bacteria, yeah.
Thanks, Danny. You're ahead of me, mate.
You said that you've got sterile males for the diamond black moth. Have you done any trial work in the UK with that, or is it just in lab?
Yeah, I've done case trials with Rothamsted, quite well-known agricultural research centre, and also with Cornell University, who again have some diamondback moth expertise. So far, those have all been contained, so big cages and that kind of stuff. We aim to go out into the field in the US later this year if regulators and everything else go for it quickly. I've given up predicting regulatory timescales in the short term, so we'll do it when we do it. In practice, I don't think we've ever been turned down for a permit for the time it takes to, because no one's ever found a significant risk to human health or environmental health from our technology. But obviously, each regulator will take their own good time to look at that and ask all the questions until they're sure about that, and that might take a longer or shorter time to do that. So we'll do it when we get the permit.
Any further questions? If not, we'll declare the proceedings closed, but I'd first like you to acknowledge those who spoke just then. Once again, please.